It's time. And today we are going to talk about range DPS. Yahoo! And the people we are talking to are Kalamazi, Toegrinder, Publik and Twicks, Hawk Corrigan, Azortharion, Preheat, and Moonkin Tettles. Are you going to leave the melee specs up there? Yeah, sure. Why not? Why not fire it up? I said this yesterday, but for anyone who's new, because maybe some people didn't care about the melee and want to only hear the range, or vice versa, I mean, that totally makes sense. Basically, if you raid in a guild who has put in a lot of effort to know what is good and what is not good, none of those people are giving their opinions publicly because you keep that information to yourself for competition's sake. So bringing on anyone from our guild or Echo specifically makes zero sense because they are incentivized to not tell the truth. And why would you have them there to just like make shit? You'd rather give someone give their real opinion when they are unable to do that. So I'm not including anyone from those guilds. So how long until Shadow? Can I do this Ruby? All right, let's just do Shadow right out of the way then. Let's just get it out of the way because you're fucking complaining. All right, hello, nice talking to you two. How are you guys doing?
Yo,
what's up?
All right, you two. So how have you guys been enjoying Shadow in 10.0?
10.0?
Oh, I guess for you guys, it's a hugely different story because like every little mini patch, your class is different. Okay, so yeah,
it's rework number 69, so it's a little.
We're going into 10.1. A lot has changed. Not tier set related, but class related. You guys had your class reworked again recently. How do you guys feel about that in general?
So, I might be against the majority, but I like changing gameplay variants, kind of. I make 4 alts every season, and I play them all quite a bit. I like different gameplay, so it's not really a positive or a negative. It's less complicated, which I think is a good thing. But when you're in a dungeon, it gives you more room to focus on other things. You know, you have these brain globals, and before they're all committed to doing DPS properly, and now you're able to focus more on, you know, maybe you want to call kicks for your group in a dungeon. You can focus more on mechanics, anything else. That's basically my initial thoughts. Public, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I definitely agree with Twix, but I do think the rework has again kind of fallen short. I think they started a bunch of interesting ideas, but none of them feel super finished. So I think it still feels a little like unsatisfying to play in a couple of moments, or still frustrating in a couple spots. I do think they're fixable, but it does kind of feel like we saw a bunch of changes when the PTR first dropped, but then it kind of fell off after that. So they fixed some problems, like Twix said. It's a little simpler to play, much easier to understand, which is great for like 90% of the player base. We'll have an easier time jumping into the spec. Definitely a good thing. But they also created a couple new problems as well, and they didn't get a chance to address those specifically. So that's kind of a bummer. So, but yeah, there's always the next rework, I guess.
Okay, how do you guys feel about the tier bonus? So you guys, you're losing your current tier bonus and going to your new one, which is very different.
You don't really. It's a passive thing. You don't really care about it. It just kind of happens. You don't really track it. You don't.
Is it good?
It just happens. It's good. It's about the same power level as we have now. It's not amazing.
It's like 7-8% single target. It's about what the tier 29 set bonus was. And then Mythic Plus, it's like 4 or 5%.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's it's so interesting to hear from all the different classes in the game because it seems like people kind of want different things, but it seems like the best case scenario is you have a good tier bonus that introduces a fun gameplay change, like good enough to where it could be on the spec tree at some point. That is like best case scenario with your tier bonus, and then right under that is you don't really think about it. It just happens, which is like most tier bonuses, but it's also good or fine. And then like what you really don't want, regardless of power level, is like a tier bonus that changes your gameplay up, but that sucks. It makes you play a talent you don't like, or it just makes you play the game differently, that in a bad way, like it's just not as fun to play around. And then obviously the worst is probably one that does nothing, and then it also makes you not think, and it's bad. So, I mean, I think in the grand scheme of things, if you have an okay, decent tier set, if you don't have to think about it, it could be a lot worse. It's kind of a maybe weird way to think about it.
This is miles better than the first iteration.
Yeah,
Like,
I was going to say,
that.
the first iteration was exactly what you said was terrible. It enabled a talent that people didn't want to play, a weird play style change. So, they listened to feedback. They give us this instead. So I definitely think is an improvement. But yeah, I think you could argue it kind of leans you towards a couple talents, and like spreads out builds a little bit. So I mean, it's fine. I mean, it you know ain't crazy, but it ain't bad either. So
All right, so I just want to give you guys the floor for like a minute or two before we rank these. Of how do you guys feel, or what do you guys think needs to be addressed the most with Priest at the moment? If you had the opportunity to like speak to a dev about it, which I know you type about this all the time, Public.
Ooh.
But if you guys had to each select like one major thing.
I want to give my take.
go for it.
So, Yogg Saron is basically every time you summon a set of apparitions, your little ghosts, you gain a stack. And at 25 stacks, you summon this thing from beyond. And he does. You kind of didn't think about him before, he just happened. But they recently buffed him. So he now scales with like your mastery. And it just scales with you now. And it does a lot more damage. So you're going to have to play around. Before you didn't really think about it, now you kind of have to play around this stacking buff every time you use a big damage ability. Maybe you need to cancel aura in a raid to get it.
Kind of like if like
Or-
lining up
yeah.
your CDs around Brawn mattered last expansion. If you had Kyrian.
Yep, very similar.
Yeah, that
It's
would
a
be
short-
kind.
Or like at
shorter, much shorter amount of stacks, but yeah.
Yeah, or like at the end of a pull in a dungeon, you don't want to summon this 25-second. It's not even 25. It's like 20. I don't remember. This beast of a pet, and then it's just AFK for the next 15 seconds. Like you're just gonna stop damage when the pull is about to die, and I feel like that's bad gameplay to play around. But also, I like that it's powerful. So I don't really know how they can solve.
So what do
this.
you want?
Maybe
What are
just-
you even complaining about?
I'm get to 25 stacks, and it enables a button to be pressed to summon it. Maybe.
All right.
I think the best change would be to make it a permanent pet instead, and that every stack increased how much damage the pet did. I think that would be the weirdest way to fix it. But
All right, Public, what's your thing?
my biggest thing I think to talk about is I did make a forum post if you want the full thoughts, but mobility I think is the biggest loss with this rework. We came into this with inside of tier 29. We had a lot of ways to deal with movement. We just have a lot of instant casts that also scaled with multi-target. So the more targets that we were facing, the more
movement.
instant casts that we got, which was awesome, amazing to play with. They removed that. So we are way more turret in 10.1 than we historically have been since I've been playing this spec, really. So that doesn't feel very good. I really would like them to address that, 'cause I think it's really going to hurt our raid viability, as like they had quite a lot of mechanics that are forced movement, and Shadow's going to struggle
there are
with that.
three
so.
bosses in this raid with a Armageddon mechanic, which requires obviously a lot of movement and soaking for ranged historically, and there's also 4 bosses with a knockback, I think. So,
Yep.
so yeah.
Yeah. So inside of cooldowns, it's okay if you're playing Void Eruption. Outside, it's really horrible. So would really like them to address that. There is like one simple change is making Mind Spike Insanity instant cast. If they did that, that would definitely help quite a bit. I think there's a long-term stuff they could change as well, or reverting the Shadowy Insight change, which was kind of annoying. But yeah, I think even for a range spec, we feel pretty immobile. I'm not asking for anything crazy, but it does feel like we've swung a little bit too far in the other direction. So
All right. So, if you guys had to guess in Mythic Plus only, and you can use my stream now. This is actually interesting that ranged are the second to go, meaning that you already have kind of the opinions of other people on what they thought with melee, which gives like kind of like a relative. You can kind of see where the power of the tier list lies. You can use that for context. Where do you guys think Shadow lands in Mythic Plus next patch?
This is just power.
Yeah,
he's
yeah,
asking.
Is this
we're not
ranking
ra-
power level?
yeah,
or
yes,
ranking
yes,
class level?
power level. Yeah, yeah. That's
So I think Mythic Plus, specifically looking at Season 2, there are a lot of really good positives about just Shadow in general. Like, our utility is going to be great. I think like all of the new affixes we handle pretty well. One of the best parts is our AoE damage has been reworked completely. We now do most of our AoE damage while doing maximum priority target damage. So that damage profile is just very valuable in Mythic Plus, if no one else is bringing it, especially. I think especially looking at this list with all the melee, I mean, we got to be at least A tier, if not S, is my thoughts, Twix.
I'm thinking at least S, maybe
Yeah.
Turbo S, depending on
Ooh.
where Warlock might be.
It's yeah, I think Warlock's the other thing to think about. I also would say like power infusion value this patch is looking really nice. Both for Shadow and also anyone we would give it to. Like if you're just looking at, I know we haven't done all the range specs yet, but if you're looking at other specs that are performing really well, like Warlock, Unholy DK, even Shaman to a degree,
Fire
like those are
Mage.
all Fire Mage,
Yeah, like
Devastation.
yeah. There's a lot
Great
of
PI
really,
targets, right?
really good PI targets. Yeah.
So yeah, I think S for sure. Oh, the other thing I was gonna say is it seems like in season 2, there's not gonna be as many like crazy kick requirements, which also, you know, Shadow, one of the biggest negatives is we have the worst interrupt in the game for Mythic Plus.
Mm-hmm.
So that isn't really as big of a negative, I think, because of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and also the Vampiric Embrace, very, very, very insane. I think
They did nerf that to note. I do think it's still strong, but it did get nerfed
Yeah.
going into
It is
10-1.
still pretty strong.
Still pretty strong. And I think similar, I think you said this about another spec, I forget. We can pick between having a 1 minute cooldown or a 2 minute cooldown,
Mm-hmm.
which is just super valuable in keys just to have that damage pattern choice.
Yeah.
Twix,
Okay.
did I miss anything?
It has insane single target damage in its Mythic Plus build.
Yep. Yeah. Full AoE, very close to
All right.
full single target.
So I have it. You guys, he said A and S, you said S and Turbo S. Twix, you are the person who does way more Mythic Plus, right?
Yep.
All right, Twix, you get the final call.
Yeah. S.
Top. Okay.
S.
High S. Okay, got it. All right, raiding combat, an upcoming raid. I mentioned the knockbacks and Armageddon soaks. Obviously, the same good PI targets still apply. What do you guys think about Shadow and Raid?
So a lot of the movement things you can kind of get around, like where Shock needs a lot of movement, but you can kind of just stutter step cast it, so it's not that big of a deal. You know, and then like Magmorax, there's that huge knockback. As long as it's not changed on live, you can negate every knock, so it's also not a big deal. There's a lot of
do you want the first boss trinket?
No.
No, we need
Unfortunate,
our-
because classes who like the first boss trinket, it's also a 3-minute knockback cancel, right? So,
that is
for all classes that need need issues with movements with knockbacks, literally every class in the game can get a 3-minute.
We definitely
Knockback.
can run it, and it's not bad.
it's good. We just
The
want,
class
like,
trinket is
the
so
Neltharion
amazingly overpowered for us, so we definitely need that. and
Good
it's
luck
kind of-
getting that. Yeah,
Well,
Yeah.
yeah. So
literally like Amanthul's level rare from Legion. You guys have to make a choice. Where's it going?
I think it's really hard to rank this without seeing where Warlock is, to be
Un-
honest.
Unholy being
Um,
S makes me want to put it in A.
I agree. I think I would say A. The movement thing is really hard for me, but again, the PI argument still holds true. Amazing, just a lot of really good PI targets.
Yeah.
I also think we're gonna potentially be really good on the last boss now that they've added adds to the fight. Because like we mentioned before, we can do most of our single target and then get that AoE damage without losing almost anything.
Mm-hmm.
So it feels like it's gonna be really good on the last boss as well.
Yeah, a lot of the raid is single target, which I don't
Yep.
know how it compares to a lot, but it seems middle of the pack in pure single target. But you know, you also have the PI to account for, which is really good.
I think it's middle of the pack single target for range DPS. I don't know. Movement's gonna really decide a lot of that. If we can't turret as much, it's gonna hurt. But yeah, I think high A, looking at this, is where I'd throw it.
All right, fuck
I
yeah.
agree.
All right, that works. Thanks for your time, you two.
Yep. Cheers, man.
Yep, I'll see you guys later.
GG.
Yep.
See ya.
bye. It is time for Azortharion. Hello.
Hello.
All right, so you had to sit through ranking and talking about survival yesterday, but now the bread and butter, MM and BM, are the topic of discussion. How have actually before even getting into 10.1, how has the journey been with the Hunter Bow this expansion so far?
A roller coaster, a pretty slow one. And then it sped up a bit towards the end. So I'd say overall, I think it's fair to call the whole bow project a bit of a failure because it was just way too strong, and it was one of those things where, like, great if you got it, but if you didn't get it, and it was very possible to not get it for the entire tier, which has happened to hundreds of people.
Mm-hmm.
It just feels really bad, and especially with BM being quite strong towards the end. If you didn't have the bow before they changed it, that is, which was too late, you were just kind of out of contention, and it just didn't feel good. Like, it decided too many raid spots, that stupid bow, and then when you had it, it's not like it was even particularly super fun to play with. Like, it was just, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
and then they made there is a very rare weapon this patch as well. It's a polearm and it fucking sucks. I think that's
Yeah.
probably because the bow
yeah,
was too
exactly. So
good.
the pole arm is, yeah, it's a bit of flavor. It does have strength to it and stuff, but most of the strength is just that it's higher eye level than most other weapons, right? So I think that will be far more tolerable. Like it'll be a sensible reward for those who push all the way to the end boss on Mythic. But it won't be so that the heroic one is stronger than literally every other weapon except its mythic counterpart.
For people who played at the beginning of 10.0, and maybe had stopped since then, maybe they weren't here for 10.0.5, 10.0.7, without going into like a ton of detail, but just giving a general idea, what does it feel like to play MM and BM this patch versus the beginning of the expansion? What's changed for better or worse?
So okay, I can just start with the boring stuff, which is BM didn't really change a lot. Like BM has the exact same talent build, and it pretty much plays the same going forward, and that's not a bad thing because when we last spoke early of the beginning of the season, I basically only had good things to say about BM gameplay because they fixed all the things that were not very popular. They gave Kill Command 2 charges and so on, and overall it's just the best incarnation it's ever been for single target, at least. A little bit more debatable for AoE. So almost nothing changes for BM. If you like BM before, you will like it now. For MM, it's quite a bit different. So they made some talent changes, and basically the summary of that is now we run this sort of a two-shot RNG proc build. True-shot is our main 2-minute cooldown, but now we regularly get like these small 6-second procs of it, and the variability, like the RNG of MM, is like off the charts. It might be one of the most AoE specs. RNG specs in like the game's history. Some people will know like the Gamba spec of enhancement, and I think this is even more like numerically speaking, it's even more RNG than that in terms of like pull-to-pull variants. Because you can just string together these insanely long periods of your main cooldown, or you can just not get any procs at all, and the difference is huge.
Yeah.
So yeah, but the highs are very high, so that's cool if you like that.
And you also natty have like Bullseye now as well, right?
Exactly, yeah. So, and they also made Bullseye so the problem before was that the 2-pointer was it was good value with 1 point, but 2 points, because of some specifics, was kind of bad value. They just made it a 1-pointer with the same effect as the old 2-pointer. So now they gave MM a pretty substantial buff in execute effectively, both by accident, because we have to go through Bullseye to get to this true shot proc talent. But also just made it, sexier just by turning it into a 1-pointer. Now we can get up to, 30% overall crit to like everything, including like trinket procs, grief torches and stuff. Sub 20% HP, which is cool.
Okay, tier bonuses. You had interesting tier bonuses in Season 1. How does it feel losing the Season 1 and going to Season 2 ones? How do you feel about the Season 2 tier sets?
I mean, they weren't very exciting, and they weren't exciting before, and they're not super exciting now. So BMs had pretty strong but pretty boring set bonuses, and the new ones are going to be pretty strong but also pretty boring. MM went from pretty weak and pretty lame to basically more pretty weak and pretty lame, and I think most of my complaints will revolve around the MM tier set for this season as well.
Okay. If you had any space to talk about potential issues with the classes or things that you wanted changed, maybe one for each spec, which probably fits into the time, what would those be?
Okay, so I think they have to decide what they want MM to be about. I think this is something we talked about in previous talks where, like Steel Trap being part of the main kit felt stupid because it's not a single big hitter ability like everything else in MM's kit. So that felt bad. And then they nerfed it and buffed Explosive Shot, which pretty much achieved that. You no longer have to run Steel Trap, so that's cool. But then the problem is, so we have this high RNG True Shot build, and True Shot is really fun. It's like one of the most fun cooldowns in the game, because everything, it just puts your whole rotation on super speed, hyperdrive. But then the tier set is trying to make you press Kill Shot more. And those who watch previous talks will say, okay, they have kind of gone halfway in the direction of execute and Kill Shot stuff. So you might think this is a good thing that the tier bonus is kind of Kill Shot oriented. But the thing is, it completely clashes with the build that the talent changes have made for us. So now we have this high True Shot uptime build, and this tier set that makes us want to cast spells that just don't fit into that at all. So the tier set doesn't fit the build, and it's just bad. So it feels bad to play. Like you get all these extra Kill Shot procs that you don't really want to spend too much of because you're so busy pressing aim shots, because aim shots are what generate more true shot uptime. But I think, to be fair to them, I don't think they intended, I don't think they said, okay, we're going to make the true shot build the meta build, because I don't think they think like that. I think that you saw, okay, no one was playing this build, it wasn't good enough, so we're going to buff it. And now it's really strong. And then they made this other tier set, which would have fit great into the pre-talent change MM, but doesn't fit so well after the changes they made themselves. So, yeah. So, I wish they would just, and if it's partly accident, maybe, yeah. I wish that MM was either a super cool, hyper powerful cooldown spec, or it was a super strong kill shot spec. One of those, but not this half thing where it's
Yeah, I always wonder what Blizzard thinks when okay, not necessarily a bad way, because I think things like deeply rooted elements or the way that you play with True Shot this patch, they can be so fun. And but also the difference between a pull can be totally huge, and then people who really care about parsing it almost just becomes RNG. It's just okay, well, this guy just got more than me. Obviously that's not everybody, but that is that's something that matters. Where they made a change recently to deep rooted elements, which made it so it can't proc off itself. They made it but they made it not be able to not proc in 5 minutes potentially. I just don't know which one of those is better, but I think the idea is cool. It's just finding somewhere in the middle. Okay, and then what do you think about BM?
I mean, yeah, so BM, not much changed. So if you liked it before, you like it now. The main problem facing BM now, but that's a constant complaint, right? It's buffers, please. But BM is not doing a lot of damage right now, and that kind of sucks. It's understandable because, a lot of people will say, well, it's fully mobile. It's pretty easy to play. It probably shouldn't do top tier damage. And maybe I have agree with that. But it probably shouldn't be the worst in the game. I mean, it's probably not the worst in the game, but it's certainly lower quartile. I think that's fair to say. Even when BM is not particularly meta or great or anything, it's one of the most popular specs in the game. So it's kind of a high impact spec when they tune that thing, because a lot of people will care about it no matter what. It has no niche, it has no burst, it's just kind of the same strength at everything roughly. The AoE is really poor, which is probably the biggest weak point, and I wish they would. I guess
I wish the
to,
talents that you have to spend as BM to gain AoE, the amount of talents you spend should give you more of an impact. I think it's very clearly.
Yeah, for sure. Because you the AoE build, you sacrifice 15% single target to go for the AoE build. For survival, that number is 4%, and for MM, it's 9%. So it's the least flexible with its build, because there's no real hybrid build. You can kind of inject some copium and try to make a hybrid build, but they just end up being worse at everything. So you either do really, really crappy AoE damage, or you do kind of as the numbers stand right now, lower quartile single target. That's all you have to choose between for BM. So that sucks. I think the gameplay is fine. I don't hear most people complain about how BM plays now. So yeah, I don't want them to mess with it too much.
Okay. If you have to rank MM and BM in Mythic Plus specifically next patch, how do you think they'll do?
BM is certainly so I had to, I debated this with some friends in Discord, and it's I didn't want to be the first to put a spec in Turbo S tier, but for BM in M+, given that it's the lowest AoE in pretty much the game, I don't even think that's controversial. Maybe there's one spec that's lower, but then that class will have other specs that outperform it. And it just, it has the utility problems of Hunter in general. It doesn't bring anything except Lust to the group in an M+ context where having these buffs matters more. So I think I have to put a Turbo S for M+.
I mean, that's definitely, just for, not saying I agree or disagree, but for people in chat, that if you have a class that has to give up that much single target to get AoE, and then they, even when doing that, have some of the worst AoE in the entire game, that is a perfect res. Not to mention that they don't have a short cooldown kick, they don't have a ton of stops. They're decently tanky now, which is actually a little bit nicer for dungeons than they used to be.
That is good.
And I also think it depends on the level you're playing at. I think if you're playing with average players in a 15 through a 20 to just get a weekly key done, I bet you queue into Brewmasters, Beast Mastery Hunters that actually do pretty well, because it's not very hard to do well at that level compared to some other classes. The skill floor is very low.
Where if you're playing at a higher level, that's kind of where you're going to see like the biggest discrepancies come out between classes, and I think that's more of what he's referring to. So okay, Turbo ass for BM.
Yeah, for M plus for sure. But I also want to say like because people will think maybe that's a little bit harsh, but it's because they're kind of thinking of BM as it has been late in the previous season, where it was like the strongest single target in the game, and then saying okay, well it loses a lot of AOE, but like if its single target was so high, that's not a big deal. But now the problem is the single target is pretty bad, and you lose a lot of it when going to the AoE build.
Yeah, BM has to do good single target to be good, basically. And if it's mid, if you are saying it's mid-tier single target, that pretty much answers that.
Yeah, exactly. So moving on to MM, I'd put that like MM has really good profile for M+. It's capped AoE, but that's not usually a big deal. And it actually has pretty strong single target in its AoE build. And very good short-term burst AoE for ads and stuff. So this is a bit of a flip around from BM. I think I'd put it A tier for M+.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Hunter is always a historically underrated Mythic Plus class in general. Like it's gotten MDI play in the last expansion or two, but even on live, it just always seems like a class that just misses out. And I think in the past it's been more due to like they've struggled to live the higher keys, but that's definitely not really a concern anymore. So
the main thing is just utility. But if you have enough damage, you can usually overcome a utility gap. I don't know if the damage is there to be like S tier, and that's why I'm putting it A tier. Yeah, I think that's fair.
No, I think that that makes sense. Okay. What do you think about the upcoming raid?
So sort of more broadly speaking, I think it looks pretty promising. Only personally tested like half the bosses, and they were all pretty cool. Very single target heavy, but I actually like that. I think there's been a lot of gimmick bosses with like a lot of AoE pattern stuff where it's like the AoE, like even on the very first kill, you're just trying to find like sort of the peak on the efficiency curve of how much single target you want to sacrifice to kill the ads in time. So I like bosses that are sort of like have more going on mechanically, but then like damage wise, you just like trying to do as much single target damage as possible. I think that's sensible.
Okay.
So I like that trend.
All right. That makes sense. Where do you think they land?
So BM is better in raid than M+, because it's not like the worst single target in the game like it arguably is for AoE. So I think for raid, I put it at C tier. And that's just because, it doesn't bring the specific utility. The single target is like lower quartile. And then the AoE is not there to make up for it. So, but I think, like if you imagine like a lower end guild or something, I think it could be like B tier or something. Because as you mentioned earlier, like like it's just very easy to pick up BM and play.
There's a huge difference between the power level of classes with lower skill floors at lower skill levels in general in raid guilds and dungeon groups and stuff. But the higher it goes, the more that becomes less of a factor for sure.
Yeah, so I'm coming from sort of a Hall of Fame like perspective-ish. Now for MM, I'd put that at B tier. That's because, while its profile is good for keys and stuff, it's not quite as good for raid. And also with the build changes being in True Shot a lot, we're not quite as mobile as we have been. So like I definitely see previously you wouldn't really lose that much DPS from movement on the average raid fight, but that is definitely not the case after the changes. Like you're not as flexible with your movement, you're a bit more locked down, and it's a bit harder to maximize. But still, it's pretty decent for raid. But yeah, B tier seems fair when I look at how Shadow Priest and stuff has been placed.
All right, cool. Yep, sounds good. All right, thank you so much for your time, man.
My pleasure.
I will talk to you again after the tier.
All right, cheers.
See ya.
I'll see you. Bye-bye.
All right, it's Moonkin time. Hello, Tettles.
What's up, buddy? How's it going?
It is going well. So your Discord thing is like a yourself with Yu-Gi-Oh hair. Do you think at any point in your life you would buy a chain that is like the Millennium Puzzle?
Did you see that Diamond Millennium Puzzle chain?
Yeah, that's what I'm referring to. Like, would you wear that?
Dude, would I wear that? Absolutely fucking not. Would I own that in my house if I could afford it? Yeah, probably. That'd be kind of cool.
Wait, let me find this. Millennium Puzzle chain. Yeah, big, like, diamond. Okay, cool. Random thought. Okay, so Moonkin has actually gone through a lot this expansion. You guys were, like, kind of incomplete without your tier in the first season. Once you got that, once you got a tier bonus, it like made your class play a lot better. You were one of the first classes in the game to actually get your tree completely redone. I think it was in 10.0.5. until then, which kind of helped a little bit with like Solar Beam being a little bit less ass, but is still kind of a thing. Basically, what has the experience been like playing Moonkin this expansion so far? What are you looking forward to in season 2 for Moonkin?
I think so far this expansion, I've had a lot of fun playing the spec. I think that the playstyle is about what I'm looking for on both single target and AoE with some of the changes that they made. I think that a lot of the cool things that they've done with the spec in regards to like changes to Starfall, they added mushrooms. In 10.0.5, you had like a lot of different talent builds that you could play, and the tier set was honestly one of the most interesting ones in regards to like how much it changed your playstyle for the expansion. 10.1, they've changed a decent amount with the spec in regards to like how much you're generating, but a lot of that is in an attempt to counteract them just absolutely gutting the Vault of the Incarnates tiers. I've personally really enjoyed this iteration of balance and how it's played, and I also like enjoy the 10.1 version of it, but I've seen some people have a couple complaints, but I find it quite fun.
Dude, okay, I want to point out something. So people are spamming the Moonkin talking meme with the sound going down in chat. That is fucking hilarious. That is the dude, I don't know what happened in the last like 2 years to have the community just be like, I think it's because there's so many Moonkin content creators randomly, like just relatively more than like any other spec in the game for some reason. And they're just fucking over it. But yeah, okay. It was Sanctum? Well, what was
it was Sanctum, yeah.
Yeah. How do you feel about the tier? I think I've been told there's not as much gameplay concerns as there was. I think initially last patch it was like, dude, if we lose this tier bonus, this class might feel really bad to play. And I think that kind of got remedied at some point. Like, how do you feel about the tier in this upcoming patch?
This tier is completely fucking bland. Like, it doesn't do anything. But damage on's fine, so
All right.
You don't really care. Like you want it because it's a nice numeric gain, but it's not like it was last patch where it's like 15% of your damage and it's unplayable without it.
Okay. And how, if you had one thing to kind of have some space to, just spit about Moonkin for a second, what is there about Moonkin you feel like that maybe needs to get changed or should be looked at? If you could pick one.
Did you have you seen our single target damage yet?
I have no comment about that.
I think balance is probably one of the worst single target specs in the game, but it's in a weird state where you still run multiple of them. And I mean, even if you look at Razgath, we don't even need to talk necessarily about 10.1 specifically yet, but even if you look at Razgath, it probably was one of the specs with the worst damage profile on that boss I've ever seen in Guild Still played 2 of them. Like, you would come out of phase 1 doing 50k DPS and you're like, this is a high roll for me, and the other top specs are like 75k coming out of phase 1. You're like, all right, this is so stupid. Moonkin's kind of in a similar state where the single target and particularly the boss damage is really fucking bad. And with the boss's next raid, it doesn't look like it's getting any favors because at least in Vault there's so many AoE fights it didn't really matter.
So you're just saying general thing is, hey Blizzard, Moonkin single target, maybe take a look at that.
Yeah.
Because it's so weird, because like this whole game, yeah, like you mentioned, this whole game is balanced around, so many unique different kinds of damage events. And like Moonkins for years now have had this extremely niche, well, not niche because it's really common, but like they're the best class in the game at spread out raid damage by a fucking mile. That like anytime it exists, they're just so powerful because of that design element. And they are the peak example of a class that could be considered OP or powerful in one raid and have the exact same tuning and be bad or average in another. So you're basically saying that, hey, maybe there isn't a lot of, Moonkin type damage events in this raid, so if our single target's this bad, it is looking rough, is what you're saying.
It is looking quite rough, and then in addition to that, buffing it is really weird, because if they end up buffing a lot of the power in like Star Surge, then we end up starting Star Surge on AoE, which is also one of probably the least fun gameplay mechanics, and so they have to be like really careful with how they buff it and nerf it, because like if they just slapped a 50% Star Surge buff, would it fix it? Yeah, but then we're Star Surging 4 targets, and you're like, okay, well, they're gonna ruin effectively how it plays too. So it's kind of a weird state with how they're supposed to buff it, but there definitely needs to be a little bit of tuning in regards to the specs damage performance, I think.
Okay. Where do you think it'll land in Mythic Plus next season? I mean, it was really, really wanted in season 1. Great class.
I think it's a little bit worse, but I still think it's probably S tier with some of these other specs.
Okay. So just like lower-ish S.
Yeah, I think that we're gonna end up in like a wizard meta for M+. I don't think we're gonna see a ton of melee just in general, and I think that like balance is definitely. I mean, it's a solid range.
Yeah,
option.
solid range, and I think raid buffs have an interesting interaction with dungeon groups because it's not like this thing that is required like it is in raid, and dungeons it's kind of just like an extra thing you bring to the group, and the fact that you bring the entire group an extra 3% damage, and it's not like you have to stack it around like a DH or a monk buff. It's flat, and then it's also like a little bit of a DR. Like obviously, Mark of the Wild gives Druid a lot of value. Not to mention off healing is awesome, right? So.
Yeah, I think Wild is definitely the best raid buff for M+, and on top of that, like the sustained AoE from the spec is definitely the shining bright spot. Where, I mean, that's most of what your Mythic Plus gameplay experience is going to be, is just sustained AoE. And their single target, not great in M+, but fortunately enough, that's less relevant most of the time.
Okay, and just another thing to look at here. How do you feel about Moonkins in raid? Kind of talked about it a little earlier, but just to make it official.
How do you rank raid buffs?
Raid buffs are not included in this list at all. This is assuming you are looking at a raid that has every single raid buff. I think just top of my head, it's arguable, but around like 10 to 12 spots in the raid that are like 100% needed at all times. This is like you have 8 DPS slots. Raid buffs are not included just based on the merit or power of those classes.
I mean, okay, so the spec on its own merit fucking sucks, but like I think that you're going to see 1 to 2 of them in a lot of raid comps because like they're ranged, and on top of that they bring Mark of the Wild, so you're gonna see at least 1 minimum is kind of my projection for a lot of raids. But the damage on its own is like really bad. It's probably like it's either B or C. It's probably a B though, just in damage.
Okay,
Because there's
lower B.
There's so many single target fights late into the raid. You have Magma Rax, which is like just like a pure patchwork fight, and while you can, avoid knockbacks and stuff like that, your utility's decent on Magma Rax, your damage is going to be bad. You have Rashok, which is also single target, and it's like, okay, well, it's not that great. They did add some adds to Sarkareth, so it's fine, but like Neltharion is mostly like a prior target fight as well, so it's like, I don't know. I think that the fights are just really poorly designed.
Yeah, but both of them have interesting caveats, right? When you're doing Neltharion, while the only adds on Neltharion are where you're doing a 40% to 0 hard and rage execute burn.
Yeah.
So it's like spending Astro Power and AoE would be insane. And then on the last boss, when they added adds, those are adds that have to be burst down. If there's anything,
yeah,
Moonkin is good at doing AoE. It's certainly not the burst variety, right? Immediately, like melee tier level of just like fucking blast instantly kind of thing.
Yeah, Moonkin definitely doesn't excel at that.
Okay.
I think it's a weird situation because you end up seeing a bunch of them be played, but then you're like, if you look at their damage, you're like, why the fuck are people playing this spec?
Okay, lower B. There we go. And that is so funny. People in chat are like, how does it make sense to rank it in B, but say you'll bring 1 to 2 of them? That is a historically accurate statement. There's been multiple tiers where Echo and us brought Moonkins 1 to 2 of, and they were nothing but average, and it was because, they just brought innervates. They brought, depending on your healer comp, you need a certain amount of innervates. Depending on the last boss, you need a certain amount of roars. It's like less of a thing this expansion, I think, because Stampeding Roar can now, one Moonkin can bring, or one Druid of any variety can bring 1 minute Roar, which like lowers the amount of Druids you would have needed to bring in the past in half, right? So,
Yeah.
So I definitely, yeah. All right, so Moonkins, and then chat's also just like, this is just going to be another time where Moonkins are saying they're bad, and then, because it is low-key like a boy cried wolf situation. They're going to act like that. They're like, when it's actually bad, you're going to complain, and it's going to not get received, because in their opinion, it's like they've been doing that when they were good.
I've stopped even stating stuff about Moonkin typically, outside of like doing this stuff.
Damn, y'all are getting bullied. That's fucking sad. Okay.
Yeah, it's fucking mad annoying.
Yeah, okay. All right, thanks for the talk, man.
All right, later.
All right, see ya. Love you. Bye. All right, we have, let's do Kalamazi. Kalamazi time.
Yo.
So we're here to talk about Warlock, a class that was kind of up and down. I mean, I think in general it's had like a good expansion, right? Like it's been good in Mythic Plus. It was used for its Dispel in a couple dungeons, and the MDI just for its damage. It was used multiple times based on the profile. As always, you have 3 specs that kind of do really different things, so you don't really require to just play one spec. There's often times when Warlock has been played, it's always had multiple specs be viable for different things. How have you felt this expansion playing a Warlock, just in general? And how does it look, the prospects of it gameplay-wise going into Season 2?
I think we were pretty bad in early Vault. I think tuning-wise, like, I don't think you all even played a Warlock on Kurog, which is a great Havoc Cleave fight.
Mm-hmm.
But mid-Vault and later on, we actually got a decent bit of tuning, which put us in a pretty solid spot, almost for every spec across the board. Every spec fit different profiles. Every spec was played in the raid to a certain extent. We're coming out of 10.0 in a solid spot. Or I guess Vault patch, a pretty solid spot. Damage profile wise, we're pretty flexible. Destro can do great cleave. Emo does good single target and stack cleave, and Af can do Af things. I think we're in a pretty good spot.
Okay. How do you feel about the tier bonuses specifically going into this patch? You can take some time on this too, because it probably widely varies based on the spec.
Yeah. So Affliction's 2-piece, 4-piece is sort of cool. It gives you basically a cooldown reduction on your 2 dots to have a cooldown on them, so you cast them more often. It feels a little exciting, a little bit. You cast them on cooldown anyways, so it feels fine. It also increases their damage by 60%, so that's sort of exciting. Doesn't really change the rotation a whole lot though. It's sort of just you have a button earlier and you're hitting it earlier, and that's like, well, it's cool. It's just sort of like, all right, I'm going to do this either way, so it's sort of, eh. When it comes to overall power for the set though, like the 4-piece. Whenever you had that dot active on them, either Vile Taint or Singularity, the target takes 10% damage from you, increased. So it's fine. It gives you a bit more burst in your like Rapture windows, which occur more often. The power level is not incredibly high though. They should likely reduce the cooldown reduction a bit more for the 2-piece, and maybe increase the dot damage on the 2-piece. It's our worst tier set, I believe, out of all 3 sim-wise.
Okay.
But it's okay, mediocre. Destruction it's based around Channel Demon Fire, which not many people like. They stuck with Channel Demon Fire, and I think it's in the best form it'll be if it stays with Channel Demon Fire, which is not changing at this point. The 2-piece, whenever you Channel Demon Fire, you launch bolts at your target, and they do more damage to your main target. These little like purple Shadow Flame bolts. It's pretty cool visually. And the 4-piece is whenever you basically proc a bolt, and casting CDF guarantees a proc, a bunch of them. It gives you basically an 8% damage increase for 13 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as like trying to find the middle ground between what it was before, it's probably the best it's going to get. It gives you a universal damage increase to basically every spell you cast, being fire spells, and that's just mostly it.
I think Blizzard, hopefully, and maybe you'll touch on this, I'll give you kind of some space in a minute to talk about things that maybe Blizzard should look at in every spec, but we talked earlier about how there are levels to tier. The best case scenario is it changes your gameplay or focuses on a talent that you love playing, and it makes your class more fun to play by existing. And it is good. That is the best case scenario for tier. Right after that is basically it doesn't change your gameplay, and it's just strong, and it just adds damage to what you're doing. And then I think the worst possible tier thing, or like tied for the bottom, is regardless of its strength, really making you play a talent or centering around a button that is just not fun to play. And I think that is kind of the sentiment I'm understanding from Warlocks, is that if there's a spell that isn't Siphon Life that you want to have text on your tier list saying that it's centered around that, Channel Demon Fire is not what that should be.
Basically. Yeah, Destro's already very immobile. You really can't move at all. And CDF is a stationary channel ability, which you have to plant to cast. And on top of that, Affliction, Demo, and Destro, every tier bonus is built around a talent. But Affliction's talent, it's either Singularity or Vile Taint. That's 1 talent point investment. Demonology is the same. It's Grimoire Felguard. Destruction has Channel Demon Fire, but there's a node below it that's 2 points that increases CDF damage. So you're now investing 3 points essentially into that to optimize your tier bonus versus 1 for Af and Demo. And it's also a bit in the first place because Destro can't move, and CDF's a bit underwhelming. So it's in Sims, it's better than Affliction's bonus from what I've seen, what I remember. in raw damage. But when it comes to like spread two target cleave and havoc windows and things, it feels really bad casting a CDF to buff your damage on one target when targets are spread. And in mass AoE and Mythic Plus, taking time off to cast a Channel Demon Fire when you're spamming a million random fires feels terrible. I just stopped doing it in Mythic Plus on PTR. It's likely worth doing, but it just feels so bad. It's like, well,
Oh, that sucks.
I just
Sucks.
don't play up the tier bonus. Yeah, whatever.
And what do you think about the demo tier?
Demo tier is pretty good. Demo tier is pretty solid. That's sort of it's fun to play with and increases your damage topic, or I guess section you were talking about.
So top tier design of that then.
Yeah, yes, but power infusion makes it bad. Bad in the way of gameplay. That's something we'll get to in a minute.
What do you mean bad? Oh yeah. Well, actually, just expand on that now.
Sure. So basically, if you're a demo warlock going in the next patch, you're getting power infusion. If you're getting it from a shadow priest, you will hold your cooldowns for the 2-minute mark to line up with their power infusion. If you're getting it from a disc priest or a holy priest, you just pop it on cooldown, and that's fine. The 2-piece reduces the cooldown of an ability called Grimoire Felguard by 1 second whenever you cast a Demon Bolt. And Demon Bolt, basically, it gives you about a 1.5-minute cooldown on Grimoire, which syncs with your Tyrant, giving you a really strong profile every Tyrant. We've never had that syncing before. So this is the one patch we're getting that, and it's really cool. Once again, Power Infusion has made that not exciting, because now we're holding cooldowns for Power Infusion, because our class is designed to work around Power Infusion.
This is the first time I think I've ever heard a class that's getting PI complain that they're getting PI because it changes the way they play. That's actually wild. I mean, that's kind of the case for PI though. Like, if you outside of like parse demons, like people who care about that shit, I really think the main issue with PI, well, besides, again, the other one where it frequently gets classes over nerfed who happen to be getting PI'd, so they don't get nerfed from, like, first to second. They get nerfed, and then they also lose their PI, so it feels really bad. But besides those two big problems with PI, the other one is when you're used to getting it and then you don't get it, it's like a negative because it feels like you're not playing the same class anymore. It feels like when you lost all the haste corruption in Nyalotha and then started playing Shadowlands, right? Anyways, continue. I just, it's definitely an ongoing thing.
No, it is. And like, to be fair, being the class that's best for power infusion, it's fun for sure. It's a great ability to get. It's fun to play with, but at the same time, wholeheartedly, I would love to give PI to a different class and not have to worry about it anymore. That's wholeheartedly the truth. Not even including the tier bonus, because at a certain point, it's just like, if you're not getting PI, it feels bad. If you're trying to parse, which, like, I don't really care anymore about parsing. I'm old like you. That's a thing of the past for the young bucks, but I love you, by the way. But realistically, it takes a lot of the fun out of the game for me. But I think parsing is more of a game 2 kind of thing, where it's not really an actual WoW thing. It's more of a log external thing. But I mean, putting that aside, this is the one tier where we have a sync with our Grimoire Felguard to our Tyrant, but now we don't if you're getting power infusion. And if you're playing Demo Locks in progression, you're probably giving them power infusion because of how strong it is with our class. It scales with our tier bonus. Our trinket's very good. Reign of Tyranny demonology is good in the first place with it. We just have a lot of damage in a very short window, and it's built around PI. PI exacerbates that. But the 4-piece is pretty strong too. So basically, Demonic Tyrant, our main cooldown, increases demon damage by 15%. Our 4-piece basically turns our Grimoire Felguard, the ability from the 2-piece is getting reduced, into a Demonic Tyrant. It increases all of our demon damage by 20% when Grimoire is active. And the 4-piece also increases Grimoire damage by 20%. So essentially you have like double the demon damage amps whenever your Tyrant and Grimoire are active. And you have that every single 1.5 or 2 minutes, depending on if your PI partner is a Shadow Priest or a Healing Priest. So it's a really strong tier set, but it feels really good to play with. It's very fun. They hit the nail on the head with Demo's 2-piece, 4-piece for sure. Putting the PI thing is just an external, something else kind of thing.
I mean, PI is an entirely different conversation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. So, if you have space, and it's 3 specs, so maybe don't try to like go insanely into detail.
Yeah.
But if you could give some kind of feedback to Blizzard about Warlock in the upcoming patch of something they should maybe focus on, look at, or change, or be aware of, what would that be?
Destruction's mobility needs to be addressed. It's just very immobile. Madness either probably needs to go, or you need to increase Madness's duration a good bit. Likely at this point, I just remove it. Shift damage from Incinerate to Chaos Bolt, and make Infernal hit. Make Infernal a cooldown again, because Destruction's profile is like one flat line. Infernal has never been less relevant or never been less relevant than it is now. Buff the infernal talents and go from there. Just address Destro's mobility, and it's mostly rooted because of madness. It can't move because of madness much. You've got a 5-second maintenance buff you have to maintain for the duration of the fight for the most part. It's just not fun. Affliction just probably needs to be buffed to get a bit. It was over nerfed a little bit in 0.07 when it was very, very good when the patch hit about a month ago. But there were some bugs that got fixed, and then the bugs got fixed, and they nerfed AF a little bit with the aura nerf, and that was fine. But they also nerfed Sacrifice, which AF caught strays from that, and they also nerfed Dark Lair a little bit, which wasn't really needed. So probably just look at AF tuning a little bit. I think Demo's fine. Like, Demo at its core, the class shrink is very, very good. The tier bonus is very good. Giving it PI makes it very, very good as well. But Demo at its core, I think, is fine for the most part. I love a permanent 2-piece Grimoire cooldown reduction leaving his patch. That'd be a great talent to add in. That'd be very cool. Yeah.
Alrighty. If you had to rank all 3 Warlock specs in Mythic Plus for next season, a class that was actually pretty good in Mythic Plus this expansion so far, where do you think they would land?
I think you put a... It's weird because Affliction has some niche utility with Soul Flame. We saw it in Algothar's Academy. I think Shadow Moon a little bit. But it's not as good as Demo or Destro Mythic Plus. I'd probably put it B tier.
B tier for Affliction? Okay.
Probably, yeah. With like an asterisk saying there's niche utility in certain spots. Destruction likely goes in A, but it has potential to be S tier in a lot of settings. The only thing with Destro is if you don't play it in a higher end setting where like packs live for a long time, like Fortified or whatever, it's very mid. You can't get Inferno value, and the damage is just
okay. So
mediocre.
Destro's probably S in high keys, but B in like mid to low. So A is somewhere in the middle. Okay.
Exactly. High A. Yeah, high A.
All right. What about Demo?
Demo's probably A as well. It's not as good as Destro. They nerfed Demonologist AoE like 2 months ago. It didn't need to be nerfed at all. It's like your best probably universal pug spec, but in certain keys it can be better than Destruction. But Demo is not as good in Plus comparatively to the Raid. Like, chat needs to realize that. It's not as good as comparatively to the Raid.
Yeah, that's why this is what happened last time when like classes are majorly different in different forms of content, and then like you that's why I split the tier list into Mythic Plus and Raid for this exact reason. But like, yeah, I mean, I also think there's just part of chat that's just like they're not trying to hear Warlocks rate their class lower than what they feel like they are.
You could likely put Destruction, if you're talking like 22, 23 plus keys, you could put Destro in A tier, or sorry, S tier. I think it'd probably be fine, honestly. Probably just toss it like low S tier. It's probably fine.
Sure.
But just keep in mind they're in the middle ground. There you go.
All right, so now you got to think about Raid. Upcoming Raid. What do you think?
Affliction's like B. It just got over nerfed a little bit too much. It's not terrible, but it's not incredible either. If they destroyed AF and Destro, you played, or if they destroyed Demo and Destro, you play AF, but you'd be like, it'd be like the same as Vault. You play one Warlock and that's it. Destruction's A. The damage is very good if you can stand still and not move at all. But there are some fights where the profile is very good too, like Amalgamation Chamber, maybe Forgotten Experiments, possibly like Echo Notharian can be a very good Destro fight too. So what does Turbo S versus S mean? Like,
well,
give me an example of Turbo S.
Yeah, I guess because there's no other class in Turbo S. I guess, well, number one, I don't really have anything to do with this list, so it can kind of be whatever you want. Kind of the whole reason this is a meme is everyone is like ranking things in their own thing. But I would say, like, historically, to me, Turbo S are classes that just absolutely shit on every other class, and it at like pretty much every think Turbo S for me, historical Turbo S classes: Fire Mages in Nyalotha, Windwalkers in Antorus, Guardian Druids as tanks in Hellfire Citadel. What's some other ones? Warlocks.
Mages. Okay.
Yeah. Warlocks in the Jaina Battle of Dazarlord tier before that Azerite trait got nerfed, where they were just doing 10% more single target than everyone. DKs in Castle Nathria, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Okay. Is this including Power Infusion?
I mean, Power Infusion exists. If you feel like you're getting... See, that's the weird thing in this game, is because if you're getting Power Infusion, you have to include it, because that's reality, right? Like, if you are not getting... like, because then you would have to like rate everyone Power Infusion, but the reality is everyone isn't getting Power Infusion. I'm not saying Demo necessarily is, but... I'm going
to link you something really fast. I don't know if you can show it, so maybe we can just, elaborate.
Yeah, sure.
You don't have to. It's a Blood Mallet sim chart. Our class trinket is very, very good. I think it's like a 5% increase over the next highest trinket in the raid, something like that. It's very, very strong. for Demonology. And without that, your damage is good, but not as good. And Power Infusion causes that to scale even more, because the Warlock class trinket is whenever you pop your main cooldown, you get an intellect buff. The other 2 trinkets are just random procs. This is every cooldown you press.
You get main stat, exactly. And
Yeah,
then,
it's massive. It's double on use every cooldown, because you play the trinket below it being Iridius Fragment. So you double on use every other tyrant, and it's just insane. But you have to have the class trinket. If you don't, not as strong. Our tier bonus, very strong as well. If you don't have it, obviously you'll get it soon. But I mean, Empower Infusion further exacerbates that. So, I mean, with all that, it probably is close to Turbo S. But if you don't have class trinket, which is rare and everything else, you probably just put it in S. Like a baseline Demo Lock without PI. A baseline Demo Lock without PI is going to be similar to the other highest single target classes in the game. But if you're getting PI and you're getting your class trinket in tier, you're going to be above.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing, this patch, because I feel like what you have to do is you have to assume that every class here has all of the gear they need, like the Infinity Stones they need to compete.
I was going to say that, yeah.
But like you have to assume that. But when you assume that, you run into the issue of the specific trinkets this patch that make you strong are unbelievably fucking rare. Like they're beyond rare. Like I bet between Echo and us, we will probably kill Neltharion close to 100 times before we step into Mythic. Maybe a bit less than that. We might see, statistically, if you assume it's the same drop chance as the Diurnia ring, but just cut into thirds because there's 3 different trinkets that can drop, you might see like either, obviously you can see 0 or you can see a lot, but like, I don't know, maybe like 3 or 4 between the 2 of our guilds of any specific Neltharion trinket statistically, but you could also just get 0. So I think you have to assume that Demo has the trinket for this rating, because you would do that for everyone else as well. But I think people need to acknowledge that if he is making the argument that Demo with the trinket is Turbo S, if you're seeing a Demo without it, that's going to be different. So it's like a huge swing. It's like basically, you're saying it's S without the trinket? That's what you think?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're putting it. So it's Turbo S.
Are you getting Power Infusion with that trinket or not? I mean, here's the thing. It's not as good as Arcane. It's not as good as Arcane Mage in Archimon Raid, whatever that was, Hellfire Citadel. It's not as good as EP Warlock was in Battle of Daggerlore. It's not as good. It's not. You're not going to go in there with 385 Azorite gear on, very low eye level, and destroy everything. You need pieces. You need Power Infusion. You need your Clash Trinket. You need your 2-piece, 4-piece. You need Iridius Fragment from Mythic Plus. If you get all those, it's like the Infinity Gauntlet, and sure, you can juice up, and you'll beat out the Unholy DKs and the Enhanced Shamans. But without one of those 4 or 5 elements, you're on the same level as them.
All right. I applaud your bravery for putting the first person to put.
You put it up there. I don't put it up there.
You said it.
Yeah,
you can put it wherever you want. You literally said it should be Turbo S, and I put it there.
No. If you include every single thing in the Infinity Gauntlet, you're Turbo S. I think
that's what you're assuming for everyone else.
Yes,
so yeah.
Yeah. So there you go. But once again, Blizzard, without that stuff,
also,
we're not as.
I'm just gonna point out that so I don't think it'll be today. Historically, it's Friday. There's like tuning changes. I don't know if you guys have paid attention to raid loot in most patches, but they've been actually making stat changes to tier and other items and trinket tuning much closer to this raid than normal. So every trinket you guys think its power level right now, that could change tomorrow. So
yeah, and briefly, like, here's the thing: if any of that changes, our Clash Trinket or Iridius Fragment changes, that's like it very easily changes this ranking. And to a similar extent, like Blizzard knows it's not just. I would assume they know it's not just Demo at its core being utterly insane. If they hit something, they need to hit either Clash Trinket or probably tier set, but you don't hit Demonology at its core talent-wise. It's just that would make it worse for everybody else not getting the Infinity Gauntlet fed to you.
All right, that works. All right, thanks, man. Are you casting our race this year?
I told you last night I was going to have to do stuff for the race and the DM. Oh, that breaks my heart. Yeah, it is. I am.
Oh, sorry. I mean, dude, I don't remember anything. So yeah, my bad. But yeah, no, I was just gonna say it's gonna be nice to see you, and I can't wait till you get here. But now I'm mad. So I don't know.
No. But I love you, and I'll see you soon.
Oh, okay. Love you too, man.
All right, thanks, man.
All right,
I'll talk to you later.
Bye. We do Magus. Hello, Mr. Grinder.
Hello.
Hello. Wait. Oh shit. Do you live in the future?
Sort of, yeah.
Okay, fuck. I would have
It's
called you
almost
earlier.
midnight.
It's super late, right?
It's okay. I work from home. I'll wake up 5 minutes before I have to start work.
Oh, fucking Jesus. So basically, mages have been through a little bit of a journey this expansion. How have you enjoyed playing mage in this expansion so far?
Yeah, I've enjoyed it personally. I think a lot of that's to do with Arcane being the best spec. It's historically not been a very good spec.
Oh, you're an
and
Arcane
kind
guy?
of I wouldn't say I'm an Arcane guy. I like to play different things, I guess, and you know, like 5 tiers in a row of play
Fire.
Frost on some bosses and then
Yeah.
play Fire on all the relevant bosses got kind of boring. I think like last time, you know, I was a big fan of Arcane and Sanctum and like Fetid Devourer like way back before, but I just like playing different things. So I like Arcane right now. I think as well, Fire and Frost, gameplay wise, I think are probably in some of their worst states since I started playing Mage, and Mage has not been getting a lot of dev attention gameplay wise. I think all 3 Mage specs right now are pretty polarizing in terms of how fun most Mage players find them.
Yeah, it's actually been really weird. Like, I think mages are one of the most constantly kept after classes historically, and there was this weird lull in time from 10.0.5 all the way to 10.1 where mages every week were like, it's gotta be this week. Just like, someone's gotta post something. And then I think what you guys were looking for was maybe a little bit of gameplay help and maybe some spec tree issues that exist, but you got like, you know, just kind of like basically like a single target buff to all 3 specs. Going into this upcoming patch. So what do you think is how is Mage gonna feel to play in the upcoming patch?
I think it's going to play pretty similar. We can get into the tier sets, but the tier sets are pretty minimal in terms of gameplay impact. Fire changes rotation a little bit. There were a few changes made to Arcane and Fire, mechanical changes. So Arcane got its Radiant Spark duration increased. Arcane had an issue before where whenever you were ramping into your cooldowns, because the duration of Radiant Spark was too short, if you ever had to like move or cancel a cast in your Radiant Spark window, like it was gone. You wouldn't be able to finish it. Whereas now like 2 extra seconds means you can like cancel a cast or make a mistake and you can still get your combo off. And they also increased the duration of the Magi, which is interesting because it's not always a buff. This was actually the tier set in Sepulcher, and I realized playing Arcane and Sepulcher a little bit that there are times where it was like a downside, like on Lahuvim, your Touch the Magi wouldn't go off before the ads in the intermission spawned, and it was really bad like the Anduin intermission because like the big ad was being pushed before CDs and stuff like that. Just like these like really random things where I'm like, oh, I wish my touch went off earlier. But other than that, I think the specs play pretty similar to this patch.
Okay. And then you mentioned the tier bonuses. If you had any time to speak about the tier, what do you like or dislike about it?
Like I said, the Fire tier set is fine. It's good on single target, it's good on AoE, it changes what talents you play, and it's interactive like it's a maintenance buff. The issue is that Fire has a lot of maintenance buffs and is very prone to disruption, which I'll get into later, which is not really how Fire has been in the past. The Frost tier set, a lot of the power level is in the 2-piece. The 4-piece is kind of crappy, especially on AoE. It doesn't really do anything on AoE. Like, the entire tier set is a bit of a failure design-wise. It doesn't change any of the talents that are good. It doesn't add anything to the spec. It doesn't change rotation. It doesn't change the gameplay at all. And it's not that good numerically.
Okay.
For Arcane, the 2 set is fine. The 4 set's the worst out of the 3, probably. They tried to do something a little bit different. So how it works is it gives you a damage buff after your cooldowns end, which is very anti-synergistic with Arcane, but there's kind of 2 ways you look at that. You could say it's bad because it doesn't synergize with Arcane. But you could also say like it's good because it being anti-synergistic is them trying to add like a new dynamic to the spec.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that there's just no talents and no rotational changes that can like lean into that. So it's kind of just failed in that regard. I see what they're going for, but I think it's missed the mark. And because it doesn't synergize with anything,
Yeah, it seemed
it's
like
not tuned
very
particularly high.
clearly they did this with you and I think Unholy in their initial tier set. The idea was, yeah, you guys do all of your damage in your cooldowns, right? So like, let's make the tier set have you do damage outside your cooldowns. Then you're like, okay, well that just feels bad because like there's nothing about your class that works with that. So they ended up with DK, they like completely caved and they were just like, okay, you can have your damage and your cooldowns back again with your tier. And I think they changed the Arcane one a little bit to kind of be not as bad as it was, right?
Yeah, they're buffing it. It's too late to rework it. I think if they're going to do something, they just have to buff it. If they buff the duration on it, it might last long enough to go into your mini burn, which I don't know, there could be something there if they buff the duration on a little bit.
Okay, and then if you had any time to speak to developers or point out one thing about each spec you think should really get looked at, it can be anything from like a really bad spec tree decision to this class's AoE in particular is like super hard to get. It's a huge investment and it's not very good. Just anything, like anything for each of the specs you think that you would want the devs to know.
Okay, I'll start with Arcane. Arcane's pretty easy. The biggest issue with Arcane is the capstones are really poorly balanced, both in the Arcane tree and the class tree. Meteor sucks. Temporal Warp is really good, but we lost it on pull like every boss this tier, and that might keep up, but if you don't lose pull, then Temporal Warp has a lot of variance. There's not that many other competitive options. For people who don't play Mage, Temporal Warp is like your second Bloodlust. And then for Arcane, in the Arcane tree, yeah, I see you have the tree up. The two capstones, so the one on the bottom left, or Barrage on the one on the other side, the Mana Gem one, are basically never played, and there's very little variety in the capstones, even in situations where they should, on paper, be good. They're just not good.
Okay. What about Fire?
Yeah, Fire's quite polarizing right now. So Sun King's Blessing and all of the nerfs that Combustion's got over the last couple of years means that the spec is like very different. Like if you think like BFA or Castle Nathria Fire Mage, there was like minimal hard casting. You were very mobile during Combust. Your Combust was good, and it had this like very good progression kit. Since then, Sun King's Blessing became the best legendary and then became a talent. Pyroclasm became the best talent and is now a talent. Both of those things make the spec like incredibly prone to disruption, which is something that Fire was very well protected against before. So if you've got a lot of mechanics like targeting you at bad times, or like boss goes out of range, or just like random things that can disrupt you during a fight, like those were things that historically Arcane was really bad at dealing with. Like if you're allowed to just sit and smack the boss, Arcane was fine. But as soon as you threw mechanics into the mix, it struggled, and I think Fire is in that spot right now.
No, I definitely agree. I like, from someone, I don't play Mage, but I watch Mage a lot, and that is something that seems so out of place. Is before Sun King's Blessing, the payoff was worth it, but now it kind of just seems like over time, it's more and more getting towards the like you're hard casting a super long spell for not much gain, and that just cannot feel good. Like it's fine with ice flows, you know, you can like shimmer with it, but it's just, you know, it just doesn't feel awesome.
With Pyroclasm as well, you just hard cast like too much to outplay them all is kind of the issue. You have to drop something. And the one thing I was going to say is the tier set is good in a vacuum, but because it's another maintenance buff that can be disrupted, piled on top of all these other buffs that you already have that make you prone to disruption, it's just bad for this version of Fire. Like I would have liked it in another version of Fire.
Okay.
And the last thing about Sun King's Blessing is the other talents suck. So Sun King's Blessing is so good that you have to take it. So if there were situations where Sun King's Blessing is on paper bad, you can't look at your talent tree and think, oh, well, I'll just spec into this instead. It's just too good that you just have to play it anyway.
Yeah, that sucks.
Which ends up being really unfun in situations.
Yep. Okay, and then what about Frost?
No Ice Lance has come back again. It seems that no matter how much Blizzard try and make Ice Lance worth casting, it always ends up getting nerfed at this point, or Frostbolt and Flurry get overbuffed. People look at like a Frost Mage damage breakdown and see Ice Lance doing a lot of damage, but the thing is, like, you cast a lot of Ice Lances. Its damage per execute time is not actually that good, so as soon as Ice Lance gets a small nerf, or Frostbolt or Flurry get a small buff, it's sometimes enough to just say, okay, I'm just not going to cast the spell at all.
That's really bad. Yeah.
Okay.
And the other thing is the Frost Mage tree, sorry to be blunt, but it's just complete garbage. Like, the pathing's terrible, there's barely any choices. The way the tree's constructed, you don't have funnel unless you're spec AoE talents anyway. Glacial Spike doesn't synergize with anything. Yeah, it's been talked in your stream before, but this entire talent tree has problems.
Jesus. Okay, well, it's all out there again, but just to make sure it's keeping reiterated. All right, how do you feel like Mage performs in Mythic Plus next patch? For each spec.
So starting with Arcane. Arcane's probably the worst of the three. All three Mage specs have quite good utility. You've got Lust, Decurse, Purge, and then you've got 2 AoE stops, and then you have Ring of Frost, which is just sometimes random quality of life. So your utility's good. I see like your list has Shaman really high. One of the issues is that your utility is almost exactly the same as Shaman's. So if Shaman's good, you're never going to get a spot based on utility. But Arcane right now, because Barrage is a lot of your damage on AoE, this is kind of target capped. And if you're going to be target capped, you need to be like very, very good at that target count, and Arcane isn't. It's also very easily disrupted in Mythic Plus if there's a lot going on, and mechanics in Mythic Plus can be a little bit more random than Raid and harder to outplay sometimes. So I would probably put Arcane like low B, maybe C. C is quite lonely, so I'm hesitant to put it there, but low B, I'll go
Low
there.
B. Okay, sure. What about fire?
Yeah, fire's great. You don't sacrifice any single target to do relevant AoE damage. Recently, fire got single target buffs, and this season, if you've been watching mages, like they've been playing a bit of fire and a bit of frost. I think when you get to like the very top keys, most mages gravitate towards fire. But on the way up, there's frost is very good. It has a really good strength this season where you can play a build that has very, very good single target damage while still doing decent AoE damage, which depending on your comp or on tyrannical weeks or certain dungeons can be really, really useful. But with fire getting a single target buff now, it closes that gap a bit, and I think that you'll pretty much just play fire all the time in Mythic Plus, even though frost is still kind of good. So I put fire in S tier for Mythic Plus.
Oh, let's go. Okay.
Frost is like low A, but you're just never going to play it because fire's better. But I think it's a fine spec. If fire didn't exist, you'd kind of be okay playing frost, I think.
All right. How do you feel about upcoming raid?
Okay. Yeah, the last Chilling Pass kind of threw things up in the air, and I'm expecting another one tomorrow, so I'm not sure. But right now, I think Arcane is probably the best spec. It's got the best damage profile for progress. It's got good CD timings, like it's a 75-ish second spec, which is kind of unique, but usually like shorter cooldowns are better. So like on Razageth, you can pop your cooldowns in the first ads and still have them for the first shield. On Dathia, you can have CDs for the first platform. Like Sardonathrius is another example. Like you can have cooldowns at useful times while making less concessions than like 2-minute classes or 3-minute classes, which is pretty good. You're the only mage spec that isn't dependent on uptime, and you've got good funnel and execute. And also, your funnel and execute spell is the same spell, so if you ever are doing both of those things at the same time, it's like a sort of multiplicative gain.
There may
the
be
last two bosses.
Yeah, there may or may not be multiple bosses in this raid where that is how it works. Yep.
Yeah, that is definitely going to come up this tier. So that's quite nice because it didn't really come up in Vault that much. The biggest issue with Arcane is how they've approached buffing the spec. Like usually during beta, you get the spells in a spot where they're do the right damage relative to each other, and then you aura buff the spec or aura nerf the spec. The problem is they've just been buffing Arcane Blast and Arcane Missiles, which is like they've been leaving out Arcane Barrage, which has done weird things to like Witch Talents are good, and it makes your funnel a bit worse and your execute a bit worse, but those things are still good enough that Arcane will be good. I would probably put Arcane. Oh, A is really lonely as well. Yeah, I'd put Arcane like low A, I think.
Low A, okay. I'll put it like mid-low A. Okay. Sounds good.
I was gonna put a B, but everyone's putting some B because they don't want to be flamed afterwards.
Yeah, I wonder how much goes into that, where it's like, because you don't want to be the guy who like puts the class too low, because then people will be like, oh, you're the reason that like no one invites me to raids and stuff. But then also you can make the argument that by doing that you have a chance of getting it buffed. But then also you put it at the top and people are just like, oh, you're gonna get us nerfed. Like, what are you doing? It like kind of depends on the group. But yeah, I understand why some people are like perma B enjoyers. They just like slam B if it's not insane.
Yeah, don't want to be controversial.
I mean, the thing is though, is realistically, if you look at like raid damage and effective damage over a period of time, most classes are actually B. Like you have like a bunch of classes that are pretty good, and then you have like a few that are really, really good, and then you have a few that are really good, and they're like insane specifically for like the design of the raid fights at the end. So like, I don't know, it always works out like that. Okay.
Yeah.
What about Fuego?
Oh yeah, sorry. One thing on that is what I said earlier about temporal warp. If we're not listening on pool, like all three mage specs get a lot worse. But yeah, fire. So I actually thought fire was the best spec up until the last nerf. Like fire and arcane were pretty close, but I think that nerf and the arcane buff is enough to just swap it around. There's been a few tiers in the past where fire's been undertuned, but because of execute, like these play. But now arcane is execute, and arcane I think is quite good. So I think it's unlikely to see play on all the bosses, but I think there are a few bosses where this will see play. So I put it like mid B,
Mid B, okay.
I think. Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't play it on every boss, but I'd be surprised if it sees play on no boss.
I think it does a lot of different things than Arcane, right? Like Arcane is very cooldown reliant and timing reliant. You can get to a fight and be like, yo, these timings absolutely suck. Can we change something? Or it's like, okay, I can kind of just slam fire. So at least it has like gameplay differences of swapping specs.
Its main thing is like free cleave, I guess. It can do very good cleave in AoE by basically giving up like no single target, which is more relevant in Mythic Plus, but I think a few bosses in Raid.
What do you think about Frost Mage?
I think it has the worst progression kit. It's probably the worst defensively, and I think now after the Arcane buffs, it's probably got the worst damage. Yeah, I would say that Frost Niche is supposed to be like patchwork-ish single target fights where all of your movement is pretty like micro movement and predictable, like something like Sludge Fist. If Sludge Fist didn't have the damage phase, like that type of movement. The problem is that I don't think it does enough single target damage to be like that spec, and if it doesn't do that, I just don't think it's good at all. I'd probably put it like bottom of B, C tier.
Okay.
Yeah, like bottom of B I think is fair. I think it's like a small buff away from getting that niche back. And I think if it does get that niche, it'll be fine, but I don't think it has it right now.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue with Frost is like historically what they've been very good at. They're in this jumbled up mess of their talent tree of being able to kind of do what they want. So yeah, I mean, if you're ever talking about like a standstill turret DPS spec, that is exactly the kind of spec that people overrate based on sims or no movement damage tests and overrate in actual progression because that's just never how fights actually work. So. Okay.
One weird thing on Frost as well. Frost in a lot of raid scenarios doesn't actually have funnel anymore as well. If you're playing AoE talents, which you would be in Mythic Plus, you do have funnel. But if you went into a fight and that has add and you're like, I only care about boss damage, your single target build actually just does more damage than like specking out of those for funnel talents, which is kind of a bit silly with how the tree's constructed. But yeah, it is what it is. I've already complained about the tree.
Okay.
So yeah, they've kind of lost that niche.
That's it. Thanks for talking to me today. We met at TwitchCon, but have I talked to you on my stream before?
No, this is the first time. Yeah.
Oh, cool. I think I tried to. I remember people telling me to talk to you before. So, okay. Hell yeah. Thanks
no worries.
for the.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for the time. Yep. See you later. Bye. Hello. Hello. Sorry, I forgot you live in the future. I should have called you earlier. It's probably super late. I apologize.
It's fine. We're good.
Okay. So. Ellie Shaman in this expansion so far. How have you liked playing Ellie Shaman gameplay wise? I know it was like a huge change from the builds you were playing from like beta up until like beginning of season 1. What has been your experience? Like how have you liked playing Ellie Shaman this expansion?
I mean, during beta, they added a talent called Primordial Search, right? That gives you like 5 lava search procs. And all things considered, what we did at the start of the tier is just combine every single talent that gives access to lava burst, right? Which just means we were only casting lava bursts. If memory serves, it's like 20 to 25 lava bursts per minute or something like that, right?
That's crazy.
I think on my whole tower skill, I did like 1 lightning bolt per minute. It's great. But yeah, so that was the thing, right? With the tier going on and like people getting more stats and everything, we started just going away from that, or at least trying to get slightly away from that, and spec into talents that would just give more damage. Like we moved away from Wind Speakers, which just gives you another lava burst on every spender, right?
Yeah.
And move to Mons Before, which just increases damage of spenders. So at the end, we came with like a build that actually casts, I think, 5 lightning bolts per minute, which is a lot in comparison. But yeah, so if you did not like to press lava burst a lot, then you probably didn't enjoy the first season.
What is the next season's gameplay looking like in comparison?
We are basically just moving from all of the talents that give access to lava burst to all of the talents that increase the damage done by lightning bolt, right? The tier 30 tier set basically gives you another Stormkeeper charge every 50 seconds it is right now. Stormkeeper just increases the damage done by your next lightning bolt by like 100% and gives you a guaranteed overload. You combine that with like Surge of Power, which procs on every spender to give you 2 extra overloads, so basically just doubles the damage. So yeah, what we're just doing is trying to just get out as hard-hitting lightning bolts as we can, and we're running with wind speakers again, so we can get 1 lava burst per spender. And with Master of the Elements, you can use that lava burst again to then buff your spenders, right? Which is a very weird gameplay loop for people that play the spec a lot, because normally, or in Season 1 and previous expansions, what you did was you are casting a spender, that gives you a lava surge, and you try to spend that lava surge as soon as possible. Because in general, your dot uptime would also give you access to more lava burst procs, more lava surges, which we are not specking to that anymore. So right now we're just holding like 1 lava burst charge for like, I don't know, 6 to 8 seconds or something like that, and use that on every single spender, which is a very weird thing to do. Basically just means that our rotation is pretty static. We're just trying to cast a Frost Shock to keep up electrified shocks, like a debuff that increases nature damage dealt. Then we're casting a Lava Burst, then we're casting an Elemental Blast, and then we're casting a Lightning Bolt every time. Am I too quiet? Do I need to turn myself
No,
up?
you're fine. I have you turned up to 200%. It's okay. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. So you think the gameplay this patch, just without being super in detail, is more along the lines of a little bit more stand still rather than a bunch of free movement lava burst procs.
Pretty much, yeah. It's a lot more similar to what we did doing pre-patch. It's a very similar build in that regard.
Well, how do you feel about the upcoming tier bonus in this patch? Specifically the tier.
Gameplay-wise, like I said, the static rotation, I don't particularly like it personally. There are a lot of people that enjoy it. It's definitely a different thing than the lava burst spamming is, right? And it's nice to just have it change, or like being changed up, right? But our biggest issue right now is tuning with it. When it was released, it was like 25% the 2 and the 4 piece. Then they nerfed the 4 piece, then it was like 20%. And they nerfed that again to now be like 10%, which I think is fine and is better than it was previously. But
what is the total power between your 2 and 4 piece that you gain next patch?
10%, roughly.
10%. Yeah, it's historically like okay. Like I would say like really good ones are 15 and up, but 10 is not awful.
Yeah. I think 20, what it was previously, was definitely too much, in my personal opinion. But yeah, I mean, the issue that we currently have is just like a thing that we came up with a few days ago, that the tier 29 2-piece is also like 7%. So we're just running 2+2 piece up until the point where we get the mythic tier 30 4-piece. Like, it's not actually BIS. We are going to replace it with like all mythic items. But yeah, that's a little
weird. There is a couple other specs that were considering that, and I think what Blizzard did once they realized it was they actually nerfed the old 2-piece and buffed the class to compensate, because like that's just a weird thing they don't want to run into. I think like using old 2 pieces early in the patch is fine, but if you're talking about like you have the ability to have full heroic new 4-piece and you're choosing to use old mythic 2-piece, that's definitely weird. It doesn't track with everything else. Okay, if there was one thing about Ellie Shaman that you would be able to point out as something that probably should be fixed or should be addressed, gameplay-wise, damage, part of the damage, 2-minute spec tree issues, like what do you think Ellie needs the most awareness about?
I mean, defensiveness is always a very big pain point for people, especially if you're running like a lot of Mythic Plus. I think next year that might be fine, just because everyone will be running Prot Paladins and we just like call dips on every single sec. All things considered, yeah, defensiveness is a big issue. Enhancement is a bit better in that regard, just because they have better self-healing, with like Healing Surge consuming their Mercenary Weapon charges, right? So yeah, other than that, the thing that you just said, right, I would prefer if they would just revert the latest nerf to the 4-piece. I think Elemental is currently a little over-nerfed after the last set of changes. So just reverting that would solve the issue for the most part.
Yeah, I almost never talk about class balance specifically leading up to races, but when I saw that nerf last week, I couldn't even hold it in. I was just like, why the fuck are they nerfing Ellie Shaman? Like, that makes absolutely no fucking sense. Especially in the scenario where, you know, what you're looking at, and a lot of people compare damage before raid that don't spend a lot of time looking at it, is they look at the damage you can do while standing still, which just affects every class in the game totally differently than other people. And Ellie's build now versus before
is going to lose more from a realistic raid encounter, right, than their previous one, and then you're already nerfing it on top of that. Very strange. So yeah, where do you think, just walking back from raid, where do you think Ellie lands Mythic Plus next patch?
I think in Mythic Plus our damage is good, and just because I mean it's a thing that I right in WoW had a lot. We have a lot of utility, but nothing unique, right? I think that just being a lot of utility for Mythic Plus is a good thing. And like I said, if our damage is fine and we also get the defensive benefits from like a Prot Paladin or something, it's A tier, probably high A tier.
Okay.
Depends a bit. Like I do think high A tier is probably reasonable.
Okay, high A tier with saying you like kind of are relying on a tank for externals. I'll drop it a few spots for that because I think you could apply that to like literally every spec.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so like mid A. Where do you think they land in the upcoming raid?
Probably sitting around Shadow Priest-ish, but we don't have power infusion, right? So what can you do? I think we are slightly worse than probably mages, or around the same level as mages. So probably would put it around in front of arms, behind arms, somewhere like there.
In front of
Like-
arms, okay.
Somewhere B tier. It's definitely not something that you would want to bring. If you have someone that plays it well, then it can definitely work fine. But yeah, like the usual issue, right? We don't bring anything unique. The damage profile right now is fine in the way that we have cleave now. We don't need to spec into either single target or AoE. We can actually spec into most single target talents and
That's
still
good.
cleave, which is good for assault, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
I am not convinced how good that's going to be for the last boss, but we are going to see.
I mean, the last boss, famously, last bosses, you would always single target is the thing that prevents you from killing it, but there is cleave. So, like, obviously, there's
exactly.
there's an emphasis on having classes on the last boss that, while doing as much single target as possible, have natty cleave that they don't have to spec into. So, if you feel like you have a build that is able to kind of do both, those classes in general on last bosses have a lot of value. Okay, and I do want to point out, so you did say if you have a good player, play it. I know a lot of people take these super seriously, and this is like, that would be so stupid because this is literally a fucking meme, but even if this was accurate, like let's just say you have a raid guild and this is exactly accurate. It's not, but let's just say it is. If your best player or a good player in your guild plays a class that is in Turbo Ass or C, you play that player 100% of the time because enough weeks have already gone by to where like gear is not the reason you're not killing something. You just need good players to be able to execute it. And that there's not that much of a big difference between classes on stuff like that. So I probably should have made a disclaimer like that at the beginning, but since you mentioned it, yeah, like if you feel like Ellie Shaman or Windwalker or BM or whatever is bad, but you have a good player who plays those things, that is always worth more than whatever the potential perceived value is. So,
Yeah. And I mean, I'm pointing it out specifically just because I think that the gameplay loop of Ellie right now is so much different from the last 6 months, right? That I don't think a lot of people can play it at that level right now. And that isn't the case for a lot of the other specs, as far as I know, at least, where the gameplay is at least similar. So they have like a lot more training in that way, right?
Okay. All right, dude. Thanks for the time today, man. Love talking to you.
Sure thing.
Yep. Thanks. See you later. So, Devastation Evoker has seen a lot of ups and downs. I think like people, when they expect a class to be released, they kind of very falsely assume historically that like, oh, it means this class is going to be super OP, where that's actually been true like basically only with Death Knights. Like Demon Hunters are actually really average for a while when they came out. Monks were really average when they came out. Mistweaver, except for Mistweaver, like right away, but then nerfed. And then like Preservation Evoker was like super insane and one of the most well-designed classes ever. But Devastation Evoker definitely did not see a lot of play in Season 1. Like they were initially like really undertuned. They had definitely a lot of design issues, a lot of which has been addressed in like 10.0.5 and 7. There was a lot of ups and downs there. The like, don't clip your Disintegrate, and then they moved it back. Basically, what has that journey been like, and do you like where Devastation is now compared to where it was?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously Devastation had a bit of a rocky start coming out, right? And I think a lot of that has to do with how Preservation, like you mentioned, was so good. I feel like it was a bit overshadowed. Obviously, we had tuning issues going into the patch, and those were addressed pretty early on. I think all of us who were playing Devastation a lot in the beta kind of were aware of the tuning issues, especially considering how our mastery works. But for some reason, it took kind of a little bit for them to, catch on to that. But yeah, I don't know. So I'm not sure if you saw the recent statistics on like rank 1 titles in Mythic Plus. But Devastation, there's like 7 in the world who are getting the Mythic Plus title.
Dude, shout
which is
out
the
them.
lowest.
The fucking the
Yeah,
few, the
for real.
proud. Yep.
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy, right? Because the next best one had like triple the amount. So obviously this was a class that just was seen as very bad in Mythic Plus. I think some of that is maybe just community perception. Obviously with a new class, like you're gonna have a lot of people playing really poorly, right? And I think a lot of that kind of translated to Devastation just being seen as like bad. It was kind of hard to find groups, I'd say. I pugged my way up to 3K just for fun, and I will say every single group I was in, people were like, "Whoa, I was surprised by Devastation," right? And it's not that, you know, I was doing all this damage. It was just that I think they're seeing really bad dragons for the most part, right? So, yeah, it definitely hurt a bit. But now we're feeling really good, and in fact, I think it's actually going to be like one of the most triumphant returns, right? Like we are coming in very strong in 10.1. And our tuning is very strong. They've done a lot to improve the talents. They've done a lot to improve our AoE capabilities as well. So yeah, I mean, it's looking really good.
Yeah, that is. Yeah, Evokers. I feel like in Mythic Plus, it was a couple of things. So number one, the other spec of your class was super fucking goated. So if people were looking for an Evoker in the group, they were going for that. And it had like much more to bring, I think, from a healing thing than it did at DPS. I also think there's a little bit of a defensive issue in Mythic Plus with Devastation Evoker. It's less true on Preservation just because they're healing themselves. But like in Devastation, you have you get like 30%. Like when you're looking at a Bark Skin or like a 30% defensive in the game, those are okay for raid. But like in Mythic Plus, when you're doing like the really, really high stuff, those kind of they aren't like sufficient. And then you have Renewing Blaze, which is actually an insanely fucking powerful button. It's like one of the best defensive buttons in the entire game, but it needs a kind of specific damage type to be relevant. Like it's terrible against one-shots, obviously, or even one-off hits of damage, but it's fucking awesome against constant damage and dots. So
yeah,
like, and that's something that's just what is more likely to kill you in a raid than a Mythic Plus. So like by default, they're just tankier in raid because of that. So I think all of those factors considered led it down to the road of it being unplayed. But I don't even know, like, just from my general knowledge of Mythic Plus, I don't think they were bad. Like, I think if like one of the better teams wanted to play a Devastation Evoker, they would do pretty well. And obviously going into this patch, it'll be whatever you end up saying it is. But what do you think about the tier bonuses from last patch to this patch?
Yeah, so when it comes to our tier bonuses, our tier gear is insane. I believe we're getting like a 16% increase with our tier. This is from having no tier, by the way. So it's very strong. And not only that, it also kind of affects the gameplay in a fun and interesting way, because we kind of adapt our playstyle to spacing out our empowers, which also naturally means that we're getting more use out of our Power Soul, which is a new talent that we can, well, it's not new, but it's a talent that we're taking now. So yeah, I mean, overall, it just gives us more burst. Like that's the bottom line. I am a bit concerned though, because obviously as Devastation Evokers, we have just like so much AoE burst. That's kind of like our thing, right? And there aren't really any ways for us to drop threat, right? So as a Devastation Evoker, you're very prone to threat. And if you're going into a group that doesn't necessarily have like a good tank, right? Especially if you're pugging, you're going to be pulling aggro and dying a lot, right? And it's not really going to necessarily always be your fault. Like I've been in situations on the PTR where a warrior pulls the whole first pull of Freehold, right? And then they use their AoE taunt, and when their taunt ends, I pull aggro, right? So like that just seems wrong to me. Something about that's just off.
Yeah, it's
I think
weird.
Devastation Mastery is... I think it should like scale your threat in some way. It just feels a little over the top.
Yeah, I feel like because of their mastery and the way how you're always going to pull threat at the beginning of a pull, like you're combining a class that has a mastery that increases its damage right when you pull something, and it also is the class that I'm pretty sure easily has the best snap burst in the game. I don't think anything in the game does more burst than pulling a relevant amount of targets, having a 20 stack, using Dragon Rage, and then using a full channeled Eternity Surge into a Tip the Scales Fire Breath or vice versa or whatever. Like that amount of damage all at once. There's no other class that can do that in that short of amount of time. So needing there's a few. I mean, historically Fury Warrior and Frosty K were like kind of like that, but less seen. But like I would say I heard people complaining about this, and I was like, dude, why isn't this a bigger deal? And then you kind of answered that question, because there's like less than 10 people playing Devastation Evoker in 25 keys.
Exactly.
So like it's just something you see a lot less, but Yeah, something for Blizzard to see, because it's not an easy change. It is an Evoker specific change. I don't think they need to buff threat across the board, because it is kind of an Evoker problem. Even as a Fury Warrior Frosty K, it's better this expansion than it was before, because tanks do good damage now.
Yeah, shout out to Kess Live, who's in the chat right now. One of the M+ Evokers who actually streams it, if you want to go check him out. But yeah, I mean, threat is definitely an issue. Whenever I got to interview Grant about Devastation Evoker, this was one of the big things I wanted to really nail down, you know, and he basically said, well, just wait to deal damage. And like, that just feels kind of counter to the whole identity of Devastation Evoker. If you're making the whole mastery and you're really talking about like the class fantasy of Devastation being dealing a bunch of damage up front, if you're telling them to wait on the pull to like not get aggroed, it just seems, I don't know, it seems to contradict like the identity of Evoker. And I think they should really look into maybe adding some sort of like bronze spell, or maybe you dilate your threat or something. I don't know what they need to do, but
okay,
it's not working right now.
If there's anything in the game right now for Evoker besides the threat thing you think could be something Blizzard should be aware of, or you want to bring awareness to, gameplay wise, strength wise, spec tree issues, what would that be?
So I'd say the biggest thing is probably a spell that I'm weary that they keep buffing it and they keep nerfing other things to try and like force us to take it, but it's just not really going to be a thing. I think they misunderstand the problem with it. It is Firestorm. So on the left-hand side of your tree, basically, there's kind of some weird pathing here, because we have volatility that we take, right? This is like our big AoE talent. You give up very little single target for this talent, right? But then you have to go into Engulfing Blaze, which is nerfed, and the damage is just really not really for AoE damage here with this talent into Firestorm. Like, the pathing's so weird here. There should definitely be a direct path from Volatility to Firestorm. But what's really interesting about this is, even if you had a path there, like even if you fix your talents in a way that's impossible to actually do on live, and you ran like a sim on like AoE, this talent actually ends up being, even with the choice nodes below it, about the same as not using that and just going like Iridescence and something else entirely, right? So like, it's just not worth it. And that's even assuming that targets stay in it for the full 12 seconds, because it takes 12 seconds to deal its damage.
The
it's
Wild
not
Spirits
like Blizzard...
problem. Yeah,
Right,
this is actually something that's consistent between a lot of specs. I would say if you are talking about DPS specs specifically throughout the game, what their issues are in their class tree, it is simply, and it can go in both directions, the points I would take to add single target or the points I would take to add AoE do not do nearly as much as their counterparts, and it makes that decision feel bad / you never do it. Yeah, it's very common.
Yeah, I think they need to actually address Firestorm itself. I think if you're going to have it last 12 seconds, which, by the way, is longer than Blizzard, Rain of Fire, all of the other ground effects that people are constantly complaining about for good reasons, right? It still just works, right? Like, it's on the tier below all the rest of them. They need to do something to maybe make it fall to targets, or just have some other interaction. Maybe it applies a dot. I don't know what they need to do. But if they want to make us run this talent, they need to change something fundamental about the talent, as opposed to just buffing it over and over and over again.
Okay. Where do you think Devastation Evoker lands on the Mythic Plus hierarchy next patch?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be really strong. Devastation obviously has the downside where it's very prone to death, right? Like, as a Devastation Evoker playing Mythic Plus, obviously you're going to be pulling aggro a lot in pugs. You're going to be having issues where you need to throw out your Deep Breath and you use it, and then you get hit by a ground effect while you're flying in the air, right? There's just like a lot of ways that Devastation can die. I like to say that it's a tanky spec, but it's not sturdy. And what I mean by that is that it's very good at dealing with damage if you know it's happening, if you're anticipating it. Like we were saying before with Renewing Blaze, if we know damage is coming in, we can be really good at surviving that, right? But if we don't know, if it's a cast that goes off that got missed, right, or it's just completely random damage, we are very easy to just immediately topple over, right? So I think it kind of depends on your comp. But that being said, with Prop Paladin being so good, I could definitely see Devastation Evoker and Mythic Plus this season being S tier.
Okay. S tier Mythic Plus on the levels of very historically great or great in Season 1. Okay, do you think like mid, low? Do you like where exactly?
I would put it low S because it doesn't have... I think the biggest thing is it doesn't really have like a leech button or like ability to just like give you back a bunch of healing while dealing damage. And for that reason, I would definitely put it low. But I think that people are going to be surprised at how much damage this class does in AoE.
Yeah, I can even see this class being very strong in Mythic Plus, if that's the case. And then even still, people won't actually think this because there won't be a lot of people actually playing it in high Mythic Plus keys.
Yeah.
Because, so it's more of like, I mean, Mythic Plus was just in general as DPS classes were just as very balanced in Season 1 compared to history. So it's possible there is a great spec, but there's just other specs that are just as good and have better utility. So maybe it isn't brought. But yeah, okay. So low S for this. All right, what do you feel about the raid?
Okay, so in raid, Devastation obviously is extremely strong, right? Like, one, we're a great PI target, right? Two, we bring utility to the fight. So if there's ever a need for, let's say, Time Spiral, right? We saw that in Razageth, where it's just you cannot do that fight without having Evokers. At least early on, you couldn't, right? So I think its value kind of depends on the value of Preservation, because obviously they're bringing the same utility to the table as you are. However, that being said, I think because of Priest being so strong and other healing balance, just from my own personal experience, I could see us being the go-to Evoker choice. So assuming that our Mastery doesn't just completely ruin everything for us, I would say we're probably low S in raid as well. But that is assuming, the caveat here is that you don't have multiple of them. Like, it's not something you would want to stack, right? Because it's too much of a liability in the sense that if you bring a whole bunch of Devastation Evokers and then there's a really hard execute, you're not going to make it, right? But they're going to help you a lot to get to that execute phase.
Okay.
Oh, there's also another reason too. So there's a bunch of bosses in the next tier, right? So you have Assault of the Zakali. Obviously, that's like an easy fight. But also like Echo of Neltharion, where Unravel is just god tier. And every single time that shield happens, right, there's an Absorb Shield to break, the target's at or above 90%. So kind of for the same reason that Fire Mage is also going to be really, really good for that because of Firestarter, Devastation is just going to be so good for that because we can break shields without even trying, right? It's just, we don't even need our cooldowns going, none of that. We just hit the shield. We're going to be basically dealing double damage, and Unravel is a very good spell.
All right. Yeah, no, I think that's... I've noticed that they've done that. I mean, obviously, Razageth was... That entire fight was built for Evokers. The multiple burns where people were shielded, or the mobs were shielded, so, like, Unravel has viability. They built that fight for Time Spiral and Rescue. Like, that was, like, a one-off thing, because I remember, like, going into this expansion, I remember talking about Time Spiral, and I'm like, I don't know when you'd ever use this instead of a Roar. Or, like, if you did, like, Roar's just, like, slightly better in most scenarios, but there's also scenarios where Time Spiral's better. And then I think that kind of showed that. So I think it's going to be interesting going forward how much Blizzard still tries to incorporate shield-based burns and things like that for Unravel, or specific rescue tech or Time Spiral tech with fights. And maybe that's their idea, that there's a lot of knockbacks this raid. So like maybe that's their thought, is like we want to make Time Spiral more relevant. So okay, and then obviously you always have Zephyr too. I think a lot of people in raid use Zephyr more as like a personal, because like,
yes,
and I think that's fine, because like most of the time you would use it as a personal, it would always affect other people. So yeah, I think that was one thing we kind of didn't mention about them, that they do pretty well.
Oh, right. Another thing too, so obviously Priest is looking really strong as a healer, right? Because of our rescue as well, I feel like we have a lot of value there too, like you mentioned with the knockbacks, right? Being able to always kind of put the Priest like immediately back on their feet for a lot of these fights seems pretty useful.
Yeah. All right. Hell yeah. All right. Good. Nice talking to you, man.
Yep.
Thanks for all the insight. That was very good.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
All right. Yep. See you later. Love you. Bye.